Despite the German surrender, independence did not come easily, and after declaring their sovereignty, Lenin's Red Army tried to retake Estonia and Latvia by force. But with civil war at home, Bolshevik forces were repelled by local Baltic militias that included schoolboys and international volunteers, including ships of the British Navy. And in 1918, the Baltic states achieved complete independence. Baltic peasants who were once regarded as mere chattel by rich landowners acquired their own lands, which were expropriated from rich German land barons. By 1923, Estonia quickly passed one of the most liberal constitutions in the world, guaranteeing their Russian, Ukrainian, and Jewish minorities autonomy and seats in parliament. Jewish synagogues and schools in Estonia were funded by the state, and Tartu University featured one of only 2 Jewish studies programs in the world. However, the transition to autonomy was not a painless one. The global depression hit the 3 countries hard, and in 1925, the Bolsheviks organized a communist coup in Estonia. The coup failed, but by 1930, autocrats came to power and eventually curbed democratic freedoms. By the late 1930s, the economies of the Baltics were booming and featured among the highest living standards in all of Europe. A former active member of the Canadian-Estonian community, historian and political analyst Andris is the author of a recent best-selling book, History of the Baltic States.
On the 23rd of August, 1939, Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia signed a non-aggression pact, known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, after the 2 foreign ministers who signed the deal in Moscow. They had an additional secret protocol which divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence between the 2 of them. The Soviet Union got Finland and the Baltic states and the eastern portion of Poland, and Germany got the major part of Poland. In effect, Stalin gave Hitler the green light to launch his invasion of Poland. After Poland had been crushed, then it was only a matter of time when Stalin would cash in on the rest of his deal with Hitler. He issued ultimata to the 3 Baltic states in September and October of 1939. Estonia was the first country to be issued an ultimatum by Moscow on the 24th of September 1939 and had only a few days to reply to this. The ultimatum demanded that Soviet troops be immediately stationed all across Estonia in bases, Soviet Army, Air Force, Navy. The situation after Soviet bases had been brought into Estonia in October 1939 continued until June 1940, when the situation changed very quickly. This had everything to do with events on the Western Front, where the so-called phony war had become a hot war, where Hitler's blitzkrieg had overrun the Low Countries and France quicker than anyone could have expected. So at the moment, German troops were marching down the Champs-Élysées in Paris. Then Stalin chose this time to issue an ultimatum to, first of all, Lithuania, then Latvia and Estonia in June 1940, while the world's attention was focused on the German triumph in France. In this new ultimatum to the Baltic states, the Soviets insisted on further increase in the amount of Red Army troops already stationed in the 3 Baltic countries, but furthermore they also demanded that pro-Soviet governments would be formed, and this was to happen immediately. There was a massive series of arrests of political opponents to the Soviet regime, culminating in June 1941 in an operation which took place simultaneously in all 3 Baltic states, where 10,000 people from Estonia, about 15,000 from Latvia and 18,000 from Lithuania were deported to Soviet Russia, most of them never to return.
By the summer of 1941, the Soviet terror was replaced by a Nazi one as Hitler's forces marched through the Baltics in a few short weeks. Initially welcomed as liberators, Hitler's plans for the Baltics were anything but benevolent. The complete Germanization of the region was ordered, and long-term plans included the mass deportation of Baltics to the east in order to make room for German colonizers. Men from all three states were forcibly mobilized to serve on both sides of the Eastern Front, and as the Germans retreated in 1944, it wasn't uncommon to find brothers forced to fight against each other as the front slid back towards the Baltics.
In the late summer of 1944, the Red Army had made advances in northeastern Estonia and also in southeastern Estonia, and broken through the lines of German forces mixed with Estonian soldiers also, and they were advancing eastward across the country. So people knew from their experiences in the summer of 1941, June of 1941, that if the Red Army reached them, they would, one of two things might happen. They might be sent to Siberia or shot. A lot of families thought this way.
So for anyone who had already lost the head of their family in 1940-41, escaping in 1944 was the only rational choice that they had.
There would be thousands of people along country roads, usually with the horse and wagon, moving towards beaches with some belongings like blankets, maybe a few suitcases of clothes and whatnot, trying to find ways of going across the Baltic Sea. I don't know if one would characterize it as a panicky movement. I think one would more probably call it as people with resignation, going and trying to save themselves and their families, and of loss, knowing that one would have to leave their homes, the rest of their families, their relatives, their jobs, all of their wealth. Everything had to be left behind to go and be DPs, displaced persons in some refugee camp in either Germany or Sweden.
Hundreds of thousands left the Baltics. They risked their lives crossing the stormy Baltic Sea to escape Soviet terror, to find refuge in Sweden. Some on larger ships, but most on small boats, some as simple as tiny rafts, while others fled south on foot to Germany. Both routes posed serious threats to the refugees, and many lost their lives. In addition to violently stormy seas, those fleeing to Sweden by boat faced military threats by the Soviet Navy, who relentlessly hunted down and sank civilian ships and boats crossing the Baltic in a blatantly illegal move that contravened all international conventions and moral norms.